July version of our Salesforce admin user group meeting based out of Portland, Oregon. Welcome to you all. If you're in the wrong spot, sorry. My name is Michael Montez. I work for NORC. I'm the co-leader with Allison from CS, Allison Rouse from CS, and we've been leading the charge here for a few years now, and just want to welcome everybody. We don't have any real announcements as far as next steps or next meetings, but we are looking at, with a larger group, overall larger group, to do a large Portland-based meetup, not meetup, but user group meeting. It may be outdoors, excuse me. It may be outdoors in a picnic style or something else, but we're still kind of fleshing all of that out. So more details to follow. All right. Okay. So today we've got Dan going to be sharing with us about Salesforce Platform Events. And Dan is the Salesforce Systems and Application Specialist Architect with Cash App. So what I want to do is just turn it over to Dan and let the party begin.
All right. This worked earlier. Let's make sure it still works. Is that sharing?
Yes, yes it is.
Awesome. I wish I was the application and system architect. I'm not. We have a technical architect and a solution architect in-house. I'm the engineering manager for our Salesforce platform here. So I own it, but I don't build on it anymore. But this is all about platform events, and they're probably wildly underutilized by most admin groups. Before Flow got big, I think the only way that you could utilize them would be through Apex. I don't know if anyone knows of any other ways to utilize it before then, call me out on it. But now that Flow is in the state that it's in, it's significantly easier to leverage platform events, especially with platform event triggered flows. And it kind of creates a whole new world of solutions that you can do and probably solve a lot of quirky issues that you've run into historically. So what are platform events? So in like any other world than Salesforce, that an event stream or an event structure or event architecture exists. You have like Kafka, you have SQS, you have SDS, you have a bunch of different like event structures that you can work off of. They're kind of considered job workers or such. But when you like really boil it down, it's a way to do asynchronous work in a fire and forget way. And so what fire and forget means is like you shoot off the request and then you don't care about it anymore. So you're not waiting for a response like in a synchronous request. So the biggest difference between synchronous requests and asynchronous requests is, again, in Flow, you can see this as scheduled actions or future actions, I think is what they're called. And the synchronous request itself would be the flow itself. Like if a person runs a flow and there is no kind of like asynchronous paths to it, like it's going to run and they might see a little spinner on their screen until all the automation completes. And like if you have a lot of really heavy automation, maybe say on like opportunity close, someone might close an opportunity and then sit there for like a second or two before they can move on to the next portion of their screen. So also, at any point, like I'm not a big PowerPoints human. I probably should be to be better at my current role, but this is more of a conversation. So at any point in time, if you have questions or thoughts about like how you could implement that in like your org or for a problem that you have, like please just like go off mute and jump in. This is significantly more of like a couch hour than a full scaled presentation. So so yeah, this sounds like a bunch of like engineering and architecture speak. Like, how does this apply to you, the admin? And one of the ways that this applies is if you're building integrations This makes integrations a lot easier with either MuleSoft. I heard someone from MuleSoft is here, or just like any like enterprise system bus service. And this makes getting data out of Salesforce really, really easy. If you want, you can use like chain data capture. If you're familiar with that, CDC, that runs on platform events. But if you don't need all of that information to go out, you can build individualized events to go out to whatever external systems you need. And you can use it for logging. So Nebula Logger, huge shout out here if you don't have a logging service. But basically, in your flows and in your code or wherever you're using it, if you have logging that is like inserting a record into like a log object, that still takes time. And so there is still some like system resources to create a platform event, but it's significantly less. So you can emit an event and then later handle all of the processing to write it to an object or do whatever you want with it. Data transformation. So if you have you can kind of data transformation and complex processing into the same bucket, but say you have a lot of transformation that needs to happen before you do whatever you plan to do with the data, and you don't need to you don't really care about like what's happening in that transformation. If you try and do this inside of Flow or maybe inside of Apex, or a lot of the times you'll push this off to like batch Apex or something like that, but you can handle it inside an event where you could publish an event, something could listen to that event, start working on the transformation of the data or the processing of the data, and then do whatever it needs to be done. Let it be right to the record. Maybe you start chaining events so it does its portion of the processing and then passes it off. A really big thing with platform events is each time an event is like received, it's a brand new transaction. So all of your like system limits about your CPU time or your queries or anything like that, they all reset. So it can be used as a way to chain through a bunch of things without the added complexity of like chaining queuables or some of the other patterns that are out there.
Dan, I have a question.
Yeah.
So in the previous two slides, we were talking about the, like you create an event, you kind of send it off in sync versus async. If I'm an administrator, is there some way that I need to think about not my architecture, but how I'm running my flows or how I'm building my automation or how I'm doing things in my head that's different with this method versus just building a flow as an example or building a series of flows?
So as you start to scale with Salesforce, especially in like large data volume, you really should be asking yourself, like, does this need to happen immediately, or can this happen in like what's called near real time? Like, does this need to happen right when they press save to like when it's done happening, it shows on their screen, right? That's like, I need to take care of this synchronously. But I would argue like there's a whole lot of the world that doesn't, right? So I know what's a really common example is like when an opportunity like close wins, a lot of people will like automatically spin up like a renewal opportunity and stuff like that. Like, do you need to do that right when it close wins, or can you do that like a second later? That's again up to your business, right? But like there's a lot of arguments there that I would say it probably doesn't need to happen. And so it's like thinking about it in that term of like, does this need to happen immediately, or can it happen sometime in the future? With platform events, sometime in the future is like very, very shortly in the future, whereas like with a scheduled action, you could schedule it like do this in 30 days. So that's also a little bit of the difference in kind of like the asynchronous.
And follow up on that, if I may, the platform events is going to send something off that's going to be somewhat asynchronous. Is it only something that you were just using an example of a renewal? Building that renewal, you would fire a platform event, then something's listening, something in Salesforce is listening, to build that renewal. Then there's also the use case where you send that platform event information to an external system that is also listening and does something on its system outside of Salesforce.
Yeah, so one of the things with platform events, it's not necessarily where you're sending it. You send everything to what's called the event bus, and then it's who wants to subscribe to it. So inside of Salesforce, you have platform event triggered, and they are flow that are triggered via platform event. Those are flows that are listening to that event stream, but you theoretically could have other services listening to that event stream. So you're publishing it one time, but 3 things hear it. We can get into some of the nitty-gritty details about how to save dollars on your billing costs with like a fan pattern instead of having a bunch of things subscribed to the same event stream because of the way that Salesforce bills all of this. But that's a few slides down. But yeah, so it's also a little different in that way. Exactly, it's like you're publishing to an event stream, but it's not like you are specifically telling things. You're just kind of putting a job into a queue, and then anything can read from that queue. I see Jeff went off mute.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of like different disconnected things about this. And one way I like to think about it, like a lot of other platform tools, is it's another tool in your tool belt. There might be characteristics of it that are useful for you and might or for a particular use case, and other characteristics might be useful for another use case. Like we're talking about external systems that can subscribe to these platform events, or there might be a lot of use cases that just are entirely internal, and that's how I started off with it, was just being able to use it internally in an org, even though its initial kind of purpose was so that external systems could subscribe and publish to it. It's there's a lot of different characteristics. So one recommendation I would have is to not worry if it's like seems like a lot of stuff. Try and just understand the different characteristics of it, so that when you face a use case that you maybe triggers a memory and saying, hey, maybe platform events is a good fit.
Yeah, so later we have some like live demo I'll go through, and it's just a characteristic of like, I want to do this thing, but I run into a mixed DML. Like there's a bunch of different ways that you can get around a mixed DML. It's just, here is one of the ways that you could if you wanted.
I also like to think of it as it's a kind of, if you're talking about the internal use cases, it's like a way of having a reusable, it's like a subflow that runs asynchronously. You can have it run this thing from a screen flow, or you can run it from automation, like record triggered flow. You can have it Apex fire it, and then you can also have an external system. So if you have this thing that needs to happen, and there's a lot of different ways for it to get initiated, platform events are a great way to do that.
Yeah, so again, this also splits your work into new transactions in a fire and forget pattern. And so again, the whole fire and forget thing is just that like whatever published the event, that's all it cares about. It publishes it, and then it literally doesn't care anymore. It doesn't wait for a response. It doesn't even, it sends off the event, and then it completely moves on, which is a bit different thinking compared to a lot of pretty much most admin tools don't work in kind of a fire and forget pattern. They work in a very synchronous pattern. So kind of going into like integrations for like incoming and outgoing, platform events, kind of like Jeff has talked about, is like this was originally built to like replace integrations. Point-to-point integrations are like so 2010. If anyone has had a bunch of integrations into Salesforce and each single one connects in a different way, but you end up like telling each of them about like a new lead or an opportunity change or something like that, like you end up updating like a bunch of different automations or you go update each of those systems to like change maybe some of the business logic, or you added a new field that you're like, oh, we need to inform all of these systems about this like one new field, and you have to go through each and every single one of them. So with platform events, you would just update the event, and now that event has that new field, and it's up to those systems if they care about that new field. So it would be like, say we added a new field called, I don't know, I don't really work in the sales world anymore, but you're sending to your ERP and you have, added some sort of like new billing subscription that didn't previously exist or something like that. You would just update whatever is emitting that event to include that. And then those systems, it's up to them if they care about that new field, because maybe you have 5 systems that connect and care, but only 2 of them actually care about that field. It's up to them to consume that field. Or if all of them need to consume that field, they can all consume that field. Just as a caveat, the way that Salesforce bills this is, and this is where things get like quirky, Salesforce bills you for how many times something is read externally from the event bus. So anything internally, let that be Apex or let that be a platform event flow, those don't count. But external systems are count per read. So if you publish one event and 5 systems read it, that counts as 5 uses of your limit. The limits are pretty nice, and they're not super expensive to add to, but it's something to think about. If you end up using this at scale, you'll probably want to use something called a fan pattern, which is basically a service in between, could be MuleSoft, could be whatever, that listens to those events and then lets the subscribers actually subscribe to it, because Salesforce then only, from the Salesforce point of view, you've only read the event one time. So pub sub, this can be either an internal pattern or an external pattern, but it also, like, this is interesting in that it allows external like systems to talk to Salesforce and ask Salesforce to do work without it being synchronous. Again, if you just use like the standard REST API of like the SObjects API, or maybe you've built like a custom like REST endpoint, those are synchronous. You have, I think it's like 5 seconds until it's considered a long running API transaction, and then 10 seconds, and you only have like 20 of those until you've hit your concurrency limits. With a pub sub, they could just emit a platform event into Salesforce and say like, do this thing. And then you can like do that thing, and the system no longer needs to wait for Salesforce to complete to know if it was successful or not. Publishes the event. Now it's up to Salesforce and your automation to like successfully handle that event. You can now handle error logging internally. You don't necessarily need to build retry mechanisms over on like, I don't know, NetSuite or whatever custom service you have, where some of those custom services don't have like the best retry patterns.
Hey, Dan, are you plan on hitting on what the characteristic about platform events that makes it nice for something like error logging?
Yeah, that's also that's a later slide.
Yep.
But I kind of touched that on that earlier, which is like error logging. To log an error takes compute time on Salesforce, and so if logging your error runs you out of CPU time, you don't log an error.
Additionally, one of the unique things about platform events is that there's 2 types of platform events. One is publish after the transaction completes, and that's more typical of what you see with asynchronous stuff on Salesforce, where you say, okay, if I'm going to do something after the asynchronous from this transaction, it will only happen if that transaction is successful, and it won't start until that transaction completes. But platform events have that unique capability of being a before type of platform event that will publish the event immediately during the transaction, whether or not that transaction finishes or is even successful. So it's super handy for logging and perhaps for other things. It's unique to platform events because it will happen regardless of what else happens later in the transaction. It will happen immediately. And it wouldn't get, and keep in mind also that if that transaction fails and gets rolled back, that publish immediate event is going to go out even in that case.
I have a question about this slide, Dan, since it seems to be about incoming, outgoing signals. The interface or the where this is all controlled, the platform events, would an application of that be to see, like, if you have multiple integrations that are connecting to the instance, and each one of these connections is like sort of a doorway, like to this integration, to that integration. Is this a way to see like data that is coming in and out of one system? I'm thinking about it from sort of the practical application of sometimes in an admin capacity, one gets asked by like the InfoSec team to be able to say like, hey, can we see all of the data points that are either being read by integrations or being read or written back to the database? Is this something that can solve for that?
It could be. If that is kind of like the path you wanted, you could theoretically limit an integration's visibility into your org just to an event. And then the only thing that integration can see is that event and whatever you publish into that event pipeline. And we'll get later, events are very similar to objects when you're building them in Salesforce. You have to define it, you have to give it a name, you have to tell it the fields, you have to tell it the data type. I don't know if that the question that your InfoSec team is probably asking is significantly closer to just like, are you making sure that your integrations are like least access built, and they should be built off of like a permission set or a permission set group type thing, not a profile, and that profile that they have should basically give it nothing, and then it's only added on, so that way you can say this integration has the permission set of integration A, and this is what that has, so this is what it has access to. But you could build a pattern where the integration can't see anything other than events. And then you can just show it. And even inside of events, like there's access control, right? So like
I was gonna say, I think that in addition to sort of like InfoSec, the InfoSec angle, there's also kind of like an angle here that I was thinking of like source of truth, that sometimes we get asked, like, what is the ultimate source of truth of this data point within our system? Like which integration is writing to our database? And sometimes when every integration is configured separately within those integration sort of, setups, it's hard to say. It's like, I don't know what the source of truth is. I think that it's being passed back and forth. I think it's, both ways. And so wondering if this would be one of many options, I'm sure, to centralize and sort of answer that question. We can say that Salesforce is the source of truth on this data point, and we also know that we're in the clear InfoSec wise.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say platform event is a solution to that. So like that situation is far more about like your general overall architecture. Again, Salesforce handles this with like just general permissioning of like integration A does not have write access to this field. Integration B does have write access to this field. And then what happens if field is different in Salesforce versus integration B, who wins? Like that's kind of like architectural against where is the source of truth. But one of the ways that, like, again, you could theoretically handle that is like if there is a situation where Salesforce is the source of truth and these other systems need to understand about changes to the source of truth, right? You could emit the changes through a platform event, and those systems could subscribe to the event. Salesforce kind of sells this as CDC. This is like kind of the bread and butter of change data capture. is like changes to an object are just emitted into the event stream, and then all subsystems that care about that object can easily understand what has changed. But yeah, again, kind of like Jeff was talking about earlier, it's just another tool in the toolbox. You could solve the thing that you're talking about. You could solve it with platform events. You could solve it with a security model. Like you can solve it with a bunch of different ways. It's really upon one, what service, like, do these integrations even support platform events? Like, I know that a bunch of integrations that we work with, I ask them like, hey, can you stop polling our system and listen to this event stream? And they like big eye question mark me of like, what's an event stream? I'm like, keep on polling us then, that's fine. So they just call in like every minute to see about changes to the system. And I'm like, could you not? And their answer is, nope, that's the only thing that we support right now. So. Oh, did it not change? Perfect. There we go. So platform events, great for logging. Kind of like what Jeff said is, if you really want to go deep into it, you can start talking about, should your platform event fire during transaction or after transaction is complete? But a really big one that I've noticed in flow that happens a lot is, a lot of the times if your flow fails, it will normally fail due to like performance issues, which means that then if you have like a custom error like object or something and you drag your little like fault lines to it, there's not enough like limit left in your process to actually log your error. So you end up just getting like the really awesome flow email, which everyone's probably gotten. And if you have like subflows, you've gotten the extra awesome 7 emails deep. That's like, where did it fail? I'll tell you in 15 to 20 minutes after like scanning through these very gross emails. So if you build a platform event that handles your error logging, again, it is very fast to publish this, requires very little system resources. If you don't want to build it yourself, Nebula Logger, just go install that. It's scary, but it's not actually as scary as it looks. But it's built on eventing for logging its stuff, and it's awesome. But just different ways that you can handle this is, again, is like removing, like when you log an error, does it need to be something that's like immediate, or do you just want to know that like some of your flows are failing and maybe the user retries or something? Probably don't do this in a screen flow, because you should inform the user that the screen flow failed. But in like your real-time ones, like you can log it in other places other than the like gigantic flow email.
I will second the plug for Nebula Logger. It's a really handy tool for troubleshooting. And if you haven't heard of it, it should be the first. We can probably put a link to it in the chat, but it's on GitHub, open source project, and it is something that you can just install and start saying, hey, in my flow, just log here and log here and log here. And it will start gathering the logs, and it's got a whole really nice UI for showing you the logs and configuring the settings for it. And it's really useful for anywhere you land on the spectrum of like development. Like, you don't have to be a developer to leverage it, and even the most advanced developers use it and love it.
So like data transformation and complex processing. I'm trying to think. Someone here probably uses like CPQ and has run into like the not super fastness of CPQ. or maybe you try and create a bunch of tasks and you end up with like a bunch of loops and stuff that your flow is just maybe not super performant, and you notice that it kind of falls over sometimes or something like that. If the requirement isn't like needed at this exact second that the user presses the button, you can split up that complex processing into a platform event. So let's say the only thing you actually need to know is like the account owner and like the opportunity ID and maybe some contact IDs or something, and you have that information off of whatever record you have in front of you. You could publish an event that just has the key data you need, and then in your event flow, pick that up. You now have the key data, and you could run through creating all of the tasks. And let's say after creating the tasks, now you need to create a bunch of like follow-up opportunities or leads or who knows what, right? You could then emit another event that would then pick that up in another platform event, and you can kind of chain them very similar to chained queuables, but without the added complexity. It's significantly easier from an administrative perspective to chain events than it is to like chain a bunch of queuables or chain batch classes. And what that does is in each one of those events is its own transactions. So you get all of your CPU time back, you get all of your SQL queries back, you get all of your DML back, you get all of that back. And so you can then split it out into kind of like units of work. And so it allows you to, it's not so much in Flow anymore, but like back in like Process Builder, people always ran into like it just being super slow and like falling apart, right? So you might still run into that. It kind of depends upon like the complexity that you have going on in your system, and you probably have one flow somewhere in your system that is just like notoriously slow, and like you get an email once a day or something about it failing, and you have to like go back in and like kick it and pray that it works type situation. Like you can think about breaking some of that up into like, this doesn't actually need to happen right now. And you probably had like previous solutions about it where you would just tell it like, yeah, do this. Like you tell it to like kind of do it as a scheduled event, and then you would tell the scheduled event to do it like an hour in the past, so that way Salesforce would do it at some point in the future. But that some point in the future is somewhere between 1 minute and 59 minutes. That's how Salesforce handles things that should have already happened when you schedule them inside of a flow. Whereas this will happen within about a second. I think there's no technical SLA or OLAs on how fast platform events are published and consumed, but they are near real time. All right, so let's talk about platform events overly complex billing structure, which they just recently changed and made it slightly more overly complex, because you used to have this thing called standard platform events, which they just recently killed because they did. So if we take this.
You might have been the only one using standard platform events though, Dan.
We weren't, but
I'm just
it's just one of those things that if you happen to have been, you're probably getting a bunch of emails now telling you to convert them, and you're it never really made a whole bunch of sense what the difference was between them. So you have this fancy sheet, and it kind of like breaks it down. So another thing you can do with platform events, which we'll show later, is you can also read them through a Lightning component. Just be aware that that is considered to be a standard subscriber like any other subscriber. So if you have a large organization, don't have every user subscribe to an event stream, because you will quickly run out of your allocations, because each one of those people would be subscribing, which means one event would be read that many times.
Yeah, they basically think consider anything that's literally outside of the Salesforce servers are like an external system. So even if it's in a Lightning component, that's actually sitting on your users' computers, and so that's technically an external system that's subscribing, and so it counts towards those allocations. And so it does multiply out really fast when you've got a lot of users using this.
Yeah. So so your event delivery, this is how many external reads can happen. So again, this doesn't necessarily mean one event. It's just how many times can an event be read by external systems. And if you have performance or unlimited, out of the box, this is 50,000. If you have enterprise edition, this is 25,000. And this is a 24-hour rolling period. It's also not the hardest limit. It is a soft limit with Salesforce gently nudging you to pay them more money if you go over it. But it updates hourly for the rolling 24 hours. And then if you have a developer edition, this is 10,000. So again, theoretically, it could be one event. If you had 50,000 subscribers, publish one event, boom, you've used your entire daily allotment. This line is new, so I'm not really quite sure about order management. They obviously have built it into the core product at some level and require it. So I'm just going to skip that. And then event publishing. So this is how many events you can publish per hour. If you're publishing 250,000 or more events in an hour, like, good on you. That is impressive. For developer editions, it's 50,000. If for whatever reason your needs are, you can ask Salesforce to purchase more. They even removed, I don't know if they used to have it, but basically you buy allotments from them that are the exact same as this. So you buy daily allotments in chunks of 50,000, and the event publishing doesn't go up by 250,000 per one. I think it only goes up by like 50,000. They're not super expensive, but they're also not super cheap unless you're a larger organization. So these limits can go up, and there is no theoretical max. For the most part, my hot take on this is Salesforce is just, they're either using like Kafka or something, and they're just like charging us the pass-through rate. But they don't. It doesn't seem to be as much as like a revenue driver for them as it is just like the cost of them generating platform events. So now we're going to go into kind of like a doing it live demonstration. So here's my really bad event subscriber. So I built. So first we're going to go through and just kind of show this. Nope, that's not the one I wanted. Nope, still not the one. There we go. So inside of setup is where you should find platform events. And here you can, oh, they added a nice little allocation thing. That's nice of them. And this is where you would create a new platform event. It's very similar to creating like an object. I also can't see the screen anymore. So just yell out if you have questions. So you would give it a label, right? An object name. Is it deployed? And then this is where what Jeff was talking about of like, what is the publish behavior? Do you publish immediately, or do you publish after successful like commit to the database? Little help screen here. Caveat, if you're going to go down the route of publish immediately, please fully understand platform events at a little deeper of a level, because you can run into sequencing difficulties. So I'm not going to go any deeper than that, but just publish after commit is probably the most straightforward concept. But like Jeff was talking about, publish immediately definitely does have its use cases. So here we're going to go into my user change event. And here we just have two fields on it. One is a role name and one is a user ID. We just have it as a text 18 for the user ID and max text for the role name. And so this has been deployed. So this is now usable. And so when I emit a user change event, this is the only thing that's going to be kind of like in that payload. The limits here are 1 meg per payload. If you get to that, again, good for you. That is a very big event. But I guess theoretically you could do it with a lot of like long text or something. I'm not quite sure how you would get to that, but again, good on you if you somehow manage to get to it. Salesforce will yell at you that the message was too big and could not be delivered to the bus. So here I have, and I just have a quick little, oh, that's the opportunity one. I'm not gonna have time to do that one. So here I have a thing where, don't mind the feature flag stuff, that's just to show you the magic of this. If someone's role is changed, it's going to get the accounts in their name and arbitrarily assign them to another user. That's what this flow does. That's if it goes down the featured disabled side. If it goes down the featured enabled side, what I'm doing here is I create a record. I name this very cleverly make event. And I am adding to the user change. If you click on this, it's the event. And I'm just populating that event. So now, if we go to this user and we change their role, we should get a mixed DML error. Nope, that didn't happen. Huh. That's what I get for doing it live.
While Dan's figuring that out, I think pointing out what happened on the previous screen earlier, if you didn't catch it, is that Flow doesn't have like a special element for publishing a platform event. You're literally just using that standard create element, and you'll see listed among the objects that you can create a record for, you'll see your platform event listed there. And to publish one, it is as simple as creating a record. It can, think of it as publishing a platform event is like creating a record for that event bus.
I'll give this another try. Theoretically, it should throw an error, but that's a bummer of doing it live. Well, theoretically, what should happen is, because the feature flag is not enabled, we should run into a mixed DML, and we're not. But basically, anytime you touch the user object and then you go and try and touch another object, you should get a mixed DML error. But we're not, and that's interesting. So that's fun. That's what I get for doing it live. But what we will do here is I do have another, just to kind of like show you what an event looks like. I do have another flow here for opportunities. And this literally just anytime an opportunity is closed won, I don't have the feature flag enabled. So it's just going to create a test event. And so that way you can kind of see what this event looks like. And so we're going to subscribe to that event. We're going to find my test opportunity and open it in a new tab. And then accidentally resubscribe to my event because I closed this one. For the most part, this just spits out garbage data, so don't worry about that. But here we've set it to close lost. And then if we go back and set it to closed won, it lost. Okay, well, this is just going exactly as expected. Let's close all of these extra tabs because it's probably running into that. Yay, there it is. So here we can see that the event was received. Bunch of interesting stuff, but here you can see that I set my op ID to just some random numbers and my op start date to also a random date, and a contract ID of just some random numbers that I set. And so that's what theoretically, if we were to build, I'm kind of running out of time. I'm going to jump to another meeting, but if we were to go and build a platform event trigger or a platform event flow, we'll just look at this one that I built for the user that didn't end up working. So like you would tell it that this is a platform event triggered flow. You would point it to the event. And then like in this one, I was going to take the user records and update it. And because the event itself is almost you can kind of think of it as like a record, on my event, there's like the user ID field because we define that inside of the event. And so it's when you're building these like triggered flows, whatever you define in the event, you then get into access to in your flow, if that makes sense.
Hey, Dan, I'm really curious for external publishers and subscribers, how do they see this stuff? Is it through a connected app?
So they would connect in and subscribe to the subscription event. And so there's a big document on like Salesforce developers of if you're going to build like a custom service, how to connect. You can connect via what's called Comet D, which I don't recommend, and you can connect via Google RPC. Okay. But if you were to do it through like MuleSoft or something, or Informatica, or whatever your favorite kind of like enterprise service bus middleware is, they probably do it via like drag and drop type situations.
I haven't used it, but I've heard good things about the Amazon Event Bridge integration.
Yeah, so Amazon Event Bridge is another thing that you can do inside of your Salesforce setup, where basically you connect your Salesforce instance to an Amazon like an AWS instance, and it will just all of a sudden inside of that AWS instance be a thing. It just like magically, like seriously, it's like it's very easy to set up, and it just magically appears, and it makes previous integrations like jealous on how fast and simple it was. And then anyone inside of Amazon Connect can consume those in whatever pattern or way they want.
Very nice. Any other questions, or Dan, any more to go over, or are we gonna?
I would say play around with it. Like every org has those default allocations. There's no cost to this, right? Play around with it. Think about areas where you might be able to do things asynchronously, and see if this tool like starts meeting your needs. Historically, a lot of the times when you started talking about asynchronous stuff, you would really have to duct tape solutions together or find someone who could write some Apex code, right? This allows you to not do that.
I can talk at a high level about a really unique circumstance where platform events really helped, where it was a combination of, hold my breath, guest users and Adobe Sign, where, and I don't want to get into a debate. I don't think that guest users should be very limited, and combining it with Adobe Sign is probably not typically a great combination, but there was a circumstance where it did make sense. And there was a point at which Adobe Sign stopped working when run in the context of the guest user. And Adobe Sign support couldn't figure it out. It wasn't like a documented thing, but they decided that, well, we're not going to support that because it wasn't something that generally makes a lot of sense. But and Salesforce says that this is a third-party problem, and so they weren't going to solve it. And so we needed to solve for a guest user context, something happening as a guest user, and we need to send out an Adobe Sign document as a result of that. So we need to change the context user that is doing this to be not the guest user. And so platform events were the mechanism that we were able to do that.
If I'm going to go forward and start exploring in this space, you're saying I've got an allocation already attributed to my sandboxes, my production, my dev orgs. I can just publish and subscribe, if I'm using the terms correctly, internally, like build a flow that builds a record and then build a flow that reads a record and does something similar. That's my kind of like my Michael Montes get started. Now I'll see what happens next scenario. Okay.
Yeah, the only caveat is think of it in the same mutability as a record, but don't think of it as a record because it lasts for 7 days and then it just goes poof. It never is committed to like a database. It just lives in memory. So like,
Yeah.
if you mention it as record, someone might be like, oh yeah, that's going to be there forever and I can get it again. And then on day 8, you will be very disappointed.
Yeah, you'll find it in the create element, but you won't find it in the get element.
Oh, I see. All right. Well, anything else? Questions, comments, concerns? I guess one other question I did have is just in general is how can this is you're talking about asynchronous processes, but how does this differ slightly? How does this differ from an actual async branch off of your flow? If I was going to do something like that.
That's
Well, an async branch off your flow, it's going to happen just that once, right? So that the record gets updated, it's going to do that async thing. That's the only thing that's going to happen when that record triggered flow runs. Platform event is just saying, hey, this thing happened. And then any number of processes could initiate from that. And you don't have to care about that. You can just say, hey, something happened. And if you care about doing something when this event happens, then you can subscribe to this and you can go and do what you need to do.
So it's less about delaying the execution of that element and more about publishing something that multiple, like I don't have to define 4 or 5 actions. I can just say it's going to go out there and now I'm going to 4, 5, 6, 3, whatever as I grow, as I adjust.
Yep.
I just say I'm going to go read from that event, from that bus.
Yep. In the developer world, they might call that separation of concerns, where you say the record triggered flow only cares about telling the rest of the system that something happened. And then the processes that care about whether or not that happened can just subscribe to that. And then they can do what they need to do when that happens.
Thank you.
If you have questions, feel free to stalk me on LinkedIn, hit me up with questions, whatever. I have to drop. I am very late for another meeting.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for letting me hijack.
Thanks. Bye.
Not a problem. All right, I'm
Bye,
gonna
everyone.
wrap it up and we'll see everybody on the next one. Thank you.